If you're a tournament player, arguably one of the most important ranges you can possibly memorize and understand are push-fold ranges. These are extremely important in late stages of tournaments and really any time your stack gets a little bit small. So today I want to run you through some of these ranges, help you understand these things a little bit better, and run you through the new range set added to the GTO Ranges app. So let's get started. Good morning, how we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit, and today I want to talk about push-fold ranges. Now we're going to fire up the app in just a moment, but I need you to fully understand that if you're a tournament player, understanding push-fold is really where the money is going to be made. If you make mistakes, especially as those stack sizes get smaller and smaller, because in tournaments that's what's going to happen, right? That blind pressure is constantly increasing, and as such your stack size is constantly dwindling, and as such you really have to be solid as those stack sizes get very small, which means you need to know when to open shove preflop, and you also need to know when you should be calling shoves as well. Alright, so with that said, let's fire up the GTO Ranges app from Redshift Poker. We're going to go over to tournament ranges, go to push fold, and just for the record, these are simplified, which means that there's not going to be any complicated mixes or partial inclusions of hands. Everything is binary. A hand is either included in a range or not included in a range. Nothing is going to be partial. So one of the first things we really have to understand when it comes to push fold ranges is that those pushing or those shoving ranges are going to be much wider than the calling ranges on average. So let's start by looking at a situation with the 7BB ranges, and let's look at a spot where the cutoff folds to them, they decide to open shove, and the button is going to call. Well, in this situation, if we compare the two ranges, we notice that the cutoff is shoving 40.2% of the time, and the button is only calling 25.1% of the time. Now, if we flick back real quick, we notice that this is with no ICM pressure, and there are three different pressure levels included here. No ICM pressure is what we're looking at right now, where ICM just really isn't a factor right this moment. Then we have a low factor, and then we also have a high factor, and those are mostly going to be for situations on like bubbles or sometimes in satellite situations, that sort of thing. So that is what you're looking at here, and if you ever get confused, just click the little icon up here and it'll tell you exactly what's going on. If you ever get confused in terms of what the heck are these ICM factors, that's where you want to go. Now, for what it's worth, there are situations where this can be inverted, and typically that's going to be in a spot where the big blind is the one we're looking at the calling range from. So let's just take a basic situation, clear this out, say under the gun shoves and folds around to the big blind who decides to call. Well, if we click done real quick and look at both of those ranges, we notice that the big blind actually has a wider range than the under the gun shoving range, and this is typically not going to be the case. Normally those shoving ranges are going to be wider, but in this exact situation this is what happens. But notice what happens if we start flicking through the ICM pressure. So we'll go through the exact same situation. Under the gun decides to shove, big blind decides to defend. Notice when we go over to low, all of a sudden we are back to wider from under the gun, and if we actually flick over one more and look at a situation with high ICM pressure, same exact spot, under the gun shoves, and the big blind decides to call, notice again how much different those ranges are, with the shoving range being much wider than the calling continuance range, even from the big blind who's getting the discount on the call. And to add on to this just a little bit, while shoving ranges, yes, are typically wider than the calling ranges compared in these ranges, it's also very important to understand that the shoving ranges can be much wider than you might think, especially if you're a cash game player. So let's just say you're over here and you go back to the app, go to 10BB, and let's just look at a situation where under the gun is going to shove. Well, notice that's 15.2% of hands, and for a cash game player it might seem absolutely insane to look here and say, oh, we're supposed to be open shoving king 10 suited from under the gun in a tournament. That probably seems a little bit nuts. So if this is your first time looking through push-shove ranges, you might be a little confused at first, but just know that this is 100% normal and as to be expected when it comes to tournament push-fold ranges. Nothing to be too shocked about here. And if you want to see shoving ranges get really wide, definitely make sure to play around with that ICM pressure that we talked about earlier. So if we stay here in the 10 big blind ranges, still click the ICM pressure to none and look at the shoving range for the low jack, notice that is roughly 24% of hands. But But if we flick that ICM pressure up to high, notice that jumps up to roughly 84% of hands. So it gets much wider as that ICM pressure really starts to ratchet up. Now I will say, if you're a cash game player and you're poking around with this for the first time, you might notice a pattern arise very quickly. So let's take a situation where still in this 10 big blind range, let's look at an under the gun shove, and you notice that if we have no ICM pressure, shoving from under the gun is 15.2% of hands. If we flick it up to low ICM pressure, notice it drops down to roughly 14. If we go up to high pressure, notice that is going up to roughly 57%. So you are getting this little dip that happens between none and low a ton of the time, and then often when you go from either of those up to high, you're going to notice that massive increase. I thought this was a little bit strange at first glance. I actually had to double check it with my team just because I am a cash game player first, and if you're interested in learning more about why this is happening and what's going on, definitely make sure to check out the article linked in the description box down below that goes through more of the technical aspects and will explain a little bit more about this dip in there. So if you're interested and you're like, what the heck is going on, make sure to read that article. Now, another important insight that comes up when you're exploring ranges like this is that there are situations where folding aces is actually correct pre-flop. So if we go back to the app, go to the 15 big blind ranges, fire the ICM pressure up to high, take a spot where the hijack decides to shove, cutoff calls, and the button is calling as well. Notice actually the button is not calling. The button's actually supposed to call here with 0% of hands, and that is not a mistake or an error in the app. That's actually correct. Aces, even in this situation, is actually supposed to be a fold from the button. And on a somewhat related note, overcalling ranges, which are allowed for in this solve, can be very tight, and even more so when the ICM pressure actually matters. So let's back up and look at a quick situation. Let's go back to the 7 big blind ranges. Let's take a spot where EP2 is deciding to shove, and we're looking at a spot where, again, ICM pressure is high and the button is calling in this situation. Notice that if we go over to the big blind and explore their calling range, it is exclusively aces. That's it. And walking this point out just a little bit further, not so much with overcalling ranges, but calling ranges in general tend to be far less known in these kind of range sets. A lot of people understand the pushing part of push-fold ranges, but not a lot of players are particularly good when it comes to the calling part. So messing around with these ranges, doing a little bit of exploration and practice is really going to help you get the calling part of your ranges down, so that way you're not overfolding or worse, underfolding in some of these situations and getting yourself into some real problems, again, later in tournaments when those stack sizes start dwindling and those important decisions can really start adding up, and those mistakes can get very costly. So with all that said, if you're interested in getting all of the ranges, exploring everything at your own pace, and keeping all of these ranges right in your pocket, you can get the app today. Go to redchippoker.com/app or look for the GTO Ranges app on your app store of choice. And if you are new to the app, you can get all of the open shoving ranges totally for free, no sign up, no nothing, or you can get all of the ranges, unlock everything, not just in the push fold, but everything else as well in the app. Again, go to redchippoker.com/app, unlock the entire thing if you're interested, and you're really going to get these ranges down quickly. Spend maybe 10-15 minutes a day running through some of these spots, and it's all going to start to make a lot more sense and kind of meld into your poker brain very well, and hopefully very quickly. So that's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for hanging out. If you have any comments or questions, please do not hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you back shortly with a brand new video, and in the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.